Hey, and welcome back to Computer Programming Basics. In this video, we're looking at the concept of variables. A variable can be defined as a named container to store information in a computer program. Before jumping into the computer programming side of it, again, we want to look at an analogy. A named container that we're all very familiar with is a lunchbox. Let's look at the life cycle of a lunchbox with a bit of a stretched example. Let's say instead of using those nice, pretty lunch boxes you buy at Walmart or Target, we have just a container, just a box with a handle on it. And we want this to be our lunchbox. Well, what's the first step in making this lunchbox come alive for us? We have to declare that this box is a lunchbox. Well, it's a container that can store something, but we want to say this container now is named lunchbox. And we're declaring that from now on, it will be used for my lunch. All right, so that's the first step in the lunchbox's life cycle. The next thing is we need to put some contents in the lunchbox. We need to actually put food in the lunchbox so we can take it with us to work. All right, that's the second step, putting content in the lunchbox. The next thing is to actually use the contents of the lunchbox. Well, of course, we go to work, and I'm going to stretch the example a little bit. Let's say for some reason your work is very secure and they're concerned about biological warfare. And so they make you put all of your food or drink through a conveyor belt on a machine that's going to scan it to make sure it's safe. Well, it's much easier that we have a lunchbox to put on that because now we know every day we don't have to think about how we're going to put our food on the conveyor belt in a safe and a secure fashion. We can just put the same lunchbox every day in the belt. It goes through, they see it, the contents are evaluated by the machine effectively, and then we take our lunchbox off and go on our merry way. It's a lot cleaner. It's a lot neater of a process than if we just carried our sandwich in our hand and put it on the conveyor belt. Yeah. So we declared the lunchbox to be a lunchbox. We put some contents into the lunchbox, and then now we use that value. But there's also another important part of the lunchbox's life cycle. After you've eaten your lunch and you've gone home, you will take the remaining contents out of that lunchbox, hopefully clean it, and then you can put different contents in the lunchbox. We had a sandwich yesterday, now we want pasta for tomorrow. And so the same lunchbox, the same named container can now have a different set of contents within it. When we go to work the next day, we put that same box nice and neatly on the conveyor belt and it goes through the machine and it's processed. Then we take it out later and we eat the contents. We go back and we do it again. But notice that same container that we declared to be a lunchbox can hold different contents at different times. But regardless of the contents, it's still processed the same when we go to work. A little stretch of an example, but hopefully it helps us to understand. Let's go back to computer programming. In computer programming, this idea of a variable, it's a named container to store information in a computer program. We have a nice and neat program since we've organized things in functions in our last exercise. But in this exercise, we want to make it even a little neater and easier to read. Instead of just having our values out like my sandwich on a conveyor belt, we want to store that information in named containers. Then we can use those named containers, and it's a lot neater for us to use in our code. In addition to our variables allowing our code to be nice, neat, and tidy, they also allow us to centralize certain aspects of our program. What do I mean by that? There's a concept in computer programming called scope. What that means is variables and other symbols in computer code can be defined or declared at different levels of your code. For example, we looked in the last exercise at functions. And so we can declare variables within a function, and those variables live within that function. We can also declare a variable outside of a function in the programming language that we're using. If we declare a variable outside of that function, then we're able to actually use the contents of that variable within any of our functions in our program. This will make a lot more sense in the exercise. So let's jump into the exercise. In the exercise, what we want to do is change the values that we have in our code so far to use variables. For example, you see the color in change avatar color. We just put red. We just put the other colors, the values in there. That's like putting a sandwich on the conveyor belt. Instead, we want to change that so that we're using variables. We're using named containers. And then what we'll do is up at the top of our code, as you see in the beginning of the exercise, we have color1 equals red. Color1, we are declaring a variable. And in this programming language, we can actually declare the variable and assign it all in one line. So we're declaring it color equals, now we're assigning it to the value of red. And so then in our code, you see here where we do change avatar color, instead of saying red, we can now put color1. And now that will use the red value that has been set above. To the exercise, want you to add color 2 and color 3 and use those. We also want to add a default sleep time variable. This variable will be used when we call the sleep function. So far, every time we've called the sleep function, we've passed in the parameter of 1,000 because 1,000 milliseconds is 1 second. We've done that 3 times in our code so far, and every time we're passing in that value. Again, that's like a sandwich on a conveyor belt, just empty. We'd rather put our sandwich in a container. We want to put that 1,000 in a variable. The variable will be named default sleep time. And since we're declaring that variable here in our function at the first part of our function, then we'll be able to use that variable the 3 times within the function where we call sleep. Of course, the advantage of that is if we need to change that value, say we want to sleep for 2 seconds or 5 seconds instead of 1 second every time we do a move, then we just change it one place where we put that value in the container, assign it to the variable, and then automatically all of those other places where it's been called will use that new value. Demonstrating the idea of the global scope, we will use the avatar color variable. This variable has been defined with the global scope or been declared in the global scope. In our function, the run function, we will set the value of this variable. The nice thing about this is that that same container, that same variable is used in other functions, but since it's been declared globally, it will have the same value that we set wherever we set it. So since we're setting it here before we call the draw avatar function, when the draw avatar function executes, it will actually use that value that we set here. And so here we can set it once and then the draw avatar will use it later. So those are the exercises, those are the details of the exercise. I hope you get in there, find out some things I haven't mentioned, play around with it, make it your own, and then come right back here for the next video in Computer Programming Basics.